In the year 3047, the Galactic Council was a beacon of hope and order, reigning over a vast expanse of star systems, each teeming with advanced civilizations. The Council had kept the galaxy relatively peaceful for millennia, using diplomacy, trade agreements, and military deterrence to keep the peace. But that peace was always precarious. And when the Deathworlders arrived, everything changed. At first, they were dismissed as a fringe faction of lunatics, a band of cosmic warlords who had no hope of overcoming the powerful, united front of the Council's military might. Their name alone, Deathworlders, sent shivers through the most hardened generals. But in truth, the Galactic Council had vastly underestimated them. The Deathworlders, a ragtag group of interstellar pirates, anarchists, and insane tacticians, arrived in the galaxy with a peculiar flair for unconventional warfare. They didn't march into battles, they skipped, swerved, and spun into them with such unpredictable methods that even the most seasoned officers of the Galactic Council could not make sense of it. Their strategy was pure chaos. There was no rhyme or reason, just a madness that defied all military doctrine. The Galactic Council, used to highly organized and efficient conflicts, found themselves caught completely off guard. They were so convinced that they had the upper hand that they hadn't prepared for the Deathworlders' wild tactics. They never could have predicted the kind of combat they'd soon face. It was a battle style that could only be described as insane. The first encounter, the spaghetti maneuver. The first time the Deathworlders made their presence known, it was during a routine peacekeeping mission at the Rovan star cluster. The Council's fleet, led by Admiral Tar, was there to negotiate with the Zogrians, a race of amphibious beings known for their political instability. The situation seemed to be a straightforward diplomatic issue until the Deathworlders arrived. The Deathworlder fleet, which consisted of ships that looked more like rickety scrap piles than advanced spacecraft, arrived in the middle of the negotiations. Without warning, they began launching completely nonsensical attacks. Instead of simply firing upon the Rovan defenses, they began weaving their ships in and out of the battlefield like drunken bees. One Deathworlder ship spun around the Zogrian flagship in what could only be described as a death spiral, only to later reverse course, shooting in the opposite direction and causing absolute chaos. The Zogrians, terrified and confused, were left to fend for themselves. "Is this a trick?" Admiral Tar asked, bewildered, watching his own fleet struggle to form coherent formations in the wake of the madness. The Deathworlders called it the spaghetti maneuver. The basic concept was simple: move unpredictably in tight, looping formations that forced the opponent's targeting systems into confusion. Their ships would suddenly change trajectory with no regard for physics, flipping on their axes and forcing enemy fire to miss wildly. The Deathworlders would then proceed to launch missiles, but in the most absurd way possible. They would send them in slow arcs that, to the untrained eye, appeared to be the most inefficient trajectory imaginable. But in reality, their missiles were guided by sophisticated AI that could target the weak points in enemy ships, taking them down with pinpoint accuracy. This tactic, which appeared to be pure chaos, had a method to it, but no one could figure out what it was until it was far too late. By the time Admiral Tar's fleet had managed to regroup, half of their ships were disabled, and the Zogrians, still rattled from the unexpected attack, quickly surrendered to the Deathworlders' demands. The Galactic Council was left in absolute confusion. How could such erratic and unpredictable tactics lead to such a swift victory? The Galactic Council's response. Back on the Council ship, members of the Galactic Council convened to discuss the Deathworlders. Chancellor Veridana of the Siren 9 system, the chairperson of the Galactic Council, was visibly frustrated. "We can't just ignore this," she said, slamming a fist onto the council table. "The Deathworlders are more than a nuisance. They're a full-blown threat. Their tactics defy logic. We need to put an end to this insanity before it spreads." "But how can we fight what we don't understand?" General Iron Vellum, an experienced officer from the Valor sector, responded. "Their tactics are unpredictable and appear to have no form. If we try to outthink them, we'll be playing right into their hands." "What if we Don't try to think? Suggested Admiral Tar, his voice laced with a mix of exasperation and curiosity. What if we try to think less? The Deathworlders aren't playing a traditional game. They're not trying to win based on logic. Maybe we need to forget what we know about warfare and embrace chaos in kind. There was a long silence. The other council members exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Finally, Chancellor Veridana sighed. You may be right. The best minds in the galaxy are being made to look like fools by these insane tactics. Maybe it's time we try a different approach, one that breaks from tradition. Thus, the council began to formulate an equally bizarre response, one that might challenge the Deathworlders' unpredictable methods. The Battle of Mirror Stars, a comedy of errors. The Deathworlders weren't done yet. After their victory at Rohan, they launched their next move on the Mirror Stars system, a cluster of binary suns that served as a key strategic point in the galaxy. The Council had to act fast. This time, however, the Council decided they would outmaneuver the Deathworlders with a counter-chaos strategy. Instead of traditional formations, they issued orders to their fleet to engage in erratic, unpredictable movements as well. Ships would dart across the battlefield like meteors, occasionally diving into tight spaces between asteroids and even dodging into the corona of one of the stars. The idea was to match madness with madness and confuse the Deathworlders at their own game. But as the battle began, it was clear that this was a mistake. The Deathworlders had a flair for the absurd, but they also had a masterful understanding of chaos theory and the laws of probability. Their ships danced across the void with an almost artistic rhythm, one that the Council's fleet simply couldn't replicate. The Deathworlders performed a series of what they called the Tango of Time, where their ships would temporarily sync with the rotations of the binary stars, allowing them to launch rapid-fire torpedoes that moved at speeds previously thought impossible. Ships were obliterated in mere moments, leaving the Council's fleet scrambling to understand how to even defend themselves against such madness. The Galactic Council was left in stitches, not from the humor of the situation, but from the realization that they had no idea how to defeat this bizarre enemy. They had been bested by an unpredictable force, one that had no respect for logic, reason, or order. It was the kind of loss that sent shockwaves through the Council, and for the first time in centuries, the mighty Galactic Council found itself questioning everything it had known about warfare. The Deathworlders' philosophy. In an unusual moment of clarity, a Deathworlder general named Zorgrath shared his philosophy with the Galactic Council during a brief ceasefire. The galaxy is built on rules, on structure, on order. But those things only exist because people believe in them, Zorgrath said, his voice echoing in the council chambers. The Deathworlders fight because we know that the moment you accept chaos, you have truly unlocked freedom. We don't win battles, we redefine the idea of what a victory is. It was a strange, almost poetic statement coming from a being known for senseless violence. Yet in those words, the Deathworlders' unpredictable nature made more sense. They weren't playing by the rules of war. They had rewritten the rules entirely. And in doing so, they had made the once unstoppable Galactic Council appear as foolish as a child attempting to outthink the universe. The Deathworlders' next move, the Laughter Protocol. The Galactic Council, still reeling from the absurdities of the Mirror Stars battle, found themselves in a state of disbelief. Despite their best efforts, their tactics seemed utterly useless against the Deathworlders. And with each encounter, the enemy seemed to grow even more unpredictable, as though their strategies were designed to push the limits of logic itself. Chancellor Veridana paced nervously in her quarters. She glanced at the tactical map, a holographic projection that was a patchwork of uncoordinated formations, chaotic movements, and baffling strategies. It was a mockery of every military doctrine they had ever established. "We've tried everything," Admiral Tar muttered, his tone full of frustration. "We've thrown every conventional tactic at them, and they've not only countered us, they've mocked us." "What if we embrace it?" said General Vellum, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "What if we surrender to chaos?" The Deathworlders seemed to thrive on unpredictability. Maybe it's time we beat them at their own game. Veridana looked at him. What are you suggesting, General? Vellum's smile widened. We'll initiate the Laughter Protocol. The Laughter Protocol was a last-ditch effort, an entirely new approach designed to throw the Deathworlders into disarray. It was, in essence, a full embrace of absurdity. The protocol involved intentionally sabotaging the Council's own fleet, making it appear even more chaotic than the Deathworlders' ships. They would purposely engage in ludicrous maneuvers, from sending ships spinning wildly into enemy lines to activating completely random systems that shouldn't function in the middle of battle. They hoped to create a spectacle so outlandish that the Deathworlders would be unable to comprehend it. At the same time, they would deploy a new psychological weapon, a special broadcast aimed at the Deathworlders' ships. The broadcast would consist entirely of laughter. The idea was that, if they couldn't beat them with tactics, they could overwhelm them with absurdity. The time had come for the Laughter Protocol to be initiated. The Battle of Irithos, a symphony of madness. The battlefield was set at Irithos, an ancient gas giant on the edge of the galaxy, surrounded by rings of ice and dust. It was the perfect backdrop for a battle of chaos. The Deathworlders arrived, predictably, with a fleet of bizarrely shaped ships, all sporting different configurations, some with wings, others without, and several that looked like nothing more than hollowed-out asteroids. Their tactics were once again inscrutable. But the Council had prepared. The first wave of their fleet entered the fray, immediately beginning to perform completely irrational maneuvers. One ship suddenly shot straight up into the air, then reversed course and plunged straight down. Another did loop-de-loops while firing missiles in every possible direction, hitting nothing but empty space. And then, the broadcasts began. Over the communication channels, a high-pitched, manic laugh filled the air, followed by fits of wild, uncontrollable cackles. It was as if someone had unleashed the most disturbing comedy show imaginable, with no rhyme or reason. The Deathworlders, having just witnessed a fleet spiraling out of control, were left stunned. They stopped their own bizarre tactics momentarily, staring at the incoming transmissions. The laughter was so intense, it rattled their crew members. It was maddening, disorienting, and, in some cases, utterly hilarious. Zorgrath, the Deathworlder general, was among the first to snap out of his confusion. He slammed his fist onto the armrest of his chair. "What is this?" he bellowed. "They're mocking us. They've gone completely insane." Despite their initial shock, the Deathworlders quickly recovered. Zorgrath, seeing their fleet immobilized by the onslaught of absurdity, began to laugh himself. It was a laugh born from madness. Soon, the entire Deathworlder fleet joined in. The battle descended into a strange, almost theatrical confrontation of laughter, erratic movements, and chaotic attacks. But the Laughter Protocol, despite its intention to mock and confuse, had a side effect no one could have predicted. It made the Deathworlders take the battle even less seriously. "Is this how they fight?" Zorgrath shouted, almost in disbelief. "We are the masters of chaos. We are the ones who redefine war, not them. They can't possibly understand the true nature of madness." And that's when the unthinkable happened. The ultimate weapon, the prank bomb. In the midst of the confusion, a new weapon was deployed by the Deathworlders, something entirely absurd even by their standards. Zorgrath had activated the prank bomb. The prank bomb was a device that looked innocuous enough, a small spherical object with bright, flashing lights and a small cartoonish smiley face on its surface. It was attached to a small craft and sent flying towards the Council's flagship. The idea behind the prank bomb was that, once it detonated, it would unleash an all-encompassing field of disorienting chaos. This wasn't just a blast of energy, it was designed to warp reality itself, creating visual and auditory hallucinations, bizarre physical distortions, and mind-bending phenomena. As the bomb exploded, the battlefield erupted into a swirl of madness. The Council's fleet suddenly found themselves flying through distorted spacetime, as if gravity had been completely turned off. Ships hovered upside down, some appearing to morph into other objects at one point. An entire battleship turned into a giant rubber duck, floating harmlessly in space. Some ships began to emit loud, obnoxious sounds, fart noises, car alarms, and even the shrill honking of clowns' noses. In the middle of it all, Admiral Tar found himself floating aimlessly in his command chair, suddenly surrounded by dancing holographic penguins. His once-ordered tactical display now showed nothing but abstract art and rotating pizza slices. The entire fleet, instead of engaging in battle, was caught in a trance of surreal nonsense. "This is insane," Tar muttered, gripping the arms of his chair. "How do we even fight this?" The Deathworlders' final gambit, the Joker Protocol. As the Council's fleet floundered in this bizarre and ridiculous mess, Zorgrath and his Deathworlders had one final move left. In response to the Council's antics, they decided to deploy their most ridiculous tactic yet, the Joker Protocol. The Joker Protocol involved sending every Deathworlder ship into battle, not with weapons or tactics, but with one singular mission: to confuse the enemy into such a state of utter nonsense that they would surrender out of sheer exhaustion. Every Deathworlder ship began to project holograms of the most nonsensical and absurd sights: aliens singing operas, giant inflatable giraffes marching across the battlefield, and entire fleets of ships transforming into massive bouncing balls. There was no logic behind the moves, they were simply absurdity incarnate, designed to create so much chaos that the Council would have no choice but to give up. And to their horror, it worked. Admiral Tar, in the middle of trying to regain control of his fleet, couldn't help but laugh at the sheer ridiculousness of it all. His command ship had just collided with what appeared to be a giant, bouncing rubber chicken, and his communications officer had been replaced by a virtual penguin who only spoke in riddles. "We can't win this," Tar admitted, finally surrendering to the madness. Let's just stop." And so, in the most anticlimactic moment in galactic history, the Galactic Council did the unthinkable: they surrendered to the Deathworlders. Chapter 4: The Deathworlders' Victory Parade. The Galactic Council was in shambles after their humiliating surrender to the Deathworlders. Chancellor Veridana convened an emergency meeting in a secluded war room, far from the public eye. It had been days since the Joker Protocol had shattered their resolve, and the council members were still in shock. "How did we fail so badly?" General Vellum groaned, rubbing his temples. "We've fought wars that spanned decades, yet we were outwitted by this." Admiral Tar leaned forward, his face pale from lack of sleep. "I don't think we were outwitted, General. I think we were just outlaughed. The Deathworlders turned our expectations of battle on their head. They made us play by their rules, or lack of them." "But what were their rules?" Veridana asked, her voice filled with a mix of frustration and intrigue. "They didn't follow any tactics we recognize. It was chaos pure, unrestrained madness. How can we fight something like that?" Suddenly, the room fell silent as the overhead screen flickered to life. It was a transmission from the Deathworlders themselves. The Deathworlders' grand announcement, the ultimate absurdity. The screen crackled with static, and then the unmistakable image of Zorgrath appeared, his wild, grinning face filling the room. "Greetings, Galactic Council." Zorgrath's voice boomed through the speakers, the laughter still echoing from the last battle. Chancellor Veridana clenched her fists. "What now, Zorgrath?" Zorgrath chuckled manically. "Oh, don't be so glum, Veridana. The Deathworlders are feeling generous today. We decided to hold a victory parade in your honor. A little celebration, you know? To mark our glorious triumph over your tragically predictable fleet." The screen switched to a live feed of the Deathworlder fleet, with ships now adorned in ridiculous decorations, glittering streamers, balloons, and party hats. A massive banner in the background read, "The Deathworlders, Chaos, Comedy, and Conquerors." What is this?" Veridana muttered, stunned. You're throwing a parade? After defeating us? Zorgrath raised a hand, gesturing dramatically. Why, of course. But the best part of a victory is celebrating it with style. We've got music, dancing, and of course pranks galore. But don't worry. You can join the fun, too. Just sign this tiny little thing here. He waved a piece of paper in front of the camera, a document labeled Galactic Surrender Agreement, signed under compulsion of laughter. The words Galactic Council were already scrawled across the signature line. No way, Veridana snapped. We'll never sign it. You've humiliated us enough. Zorgrath grinned. Oh, you misunderstand. You're already signed. That's part of the deal. By not stopping the parade, you've effectively conceded. You're in on the fun now. Think of it like a mandatory comedy show. We'll even send you some hats to wear for the occasion. Don't worry, the colors are very flattering. The screen cut out, leaving the council in stunned silence. The Galactic Council's dilemma. The council members stared at the blank screen, completely dumbfounded. They can't be serious, Admiral Tar muttered. They are, General Vellum replied grimly. I think we've underestimated just how far gone they are. They've won by turning the very concept of warfare into a joke. We need to act, Veridana finally said, her voice steely. This madness must end. If we let them continue with this farce, we'll lose all respect in the galaxy. But how do we stop them? Vellum asked. They're unpredictable. Even our best minds can't keep up with their antics. For a moment, there was silence as the council pondered their next move. Then, an idea sparked in Veridana's mind. We won't fight them in the traditional sense. If the Deathworlders thrive on chaos, then maybe it's time we try our hand at the absurd. Operation Boogeyman, the Dance of Defiance. The Galactic Council, desperate to regain some sense of control, launched a daring new operation. It was called Operation Boogeyman, a direct challenge to the Deathworlders' methods. Rather than continue with their military strategies, the Council decided to throw an unexpected curveball. They would invade the Deathworlder fleet not with weapons, but with a dance-off. The Council's fleet, under the command of Admiral Tar, descended upon the Deathworlder flagship, but instead of launching a traditional assault, they deployed massive holographic projectors that broadcasted an outrageous, high-energy dance routine to the entire fleet. The moves were chaotic, impossible to replicate, and utterly absurd. Soldiers, pilots, and even the usually stony-faced generals were forced to dance in bizarre formations, twisting, jerking, and leaping in completely nonsensical ways. It was meant to be both a show of defiance and an attempt to out-weird the Deathworlders. At first, the Deathworlders were stunned. Their ships halted mid-flight as they observed the Council's attack with a mix of confusion and amusement. Then, something unexpected happened. Zorgrath burst into uncontrollable laughter. "Oh, this is rich!" he exclaimed. "A dance-off. The Galactic Council is dancing. This is the most insane thing I've ever seen." And yet, there was something deeply unsettling about the whole situation. As Zorgrath and his crew watched the spectacle unfold, they couldn't help but feel the tide shifting. They were used to being the instigators of chaos, the ones who made others react. But now, they were the ones reacting. The Council had become the unpredictable force. They had, in their own way, forced the Deathworlders to play their game. A new kind of battle. As the dance routine reached its fever pitch, the Deathworlder fleet responded in kind. Zorgrath, taking the lead, began a bizarre, uncoordinated dance of his own. His ship released thousands of holographic monkeys that performed acrobatics mid-air, while other Deathworlder ships began to project the sound of 1,000 honking horns. The battle had turned into an interstellar circus, with no weapons fired, no missiles launched, just pure, unrelenting absurdity. For hours, the two fleets clashed in the most ridiculous, chaotic dance-off the galaxy had ever seen. Ships pirouetted through space, dodged asteroid rings in perfect rhythm, and emitted sounds that could only be described as intergalactic carnival music. The Deathworlders, who had previously held the upper hand with their unpredictable maneuvers, were now caught in the strange gravity of the Council's unexpected move. It was a battle not of military might, but of who could be more absurd. The unlikely conclusion. As the hours wore on, something strange began to happen. Both fleets, utterly exhausted by the relentless absurdity, began to settle into a truce of sorts. There was no formal ceasefire, but the insane spectacle had become too much for anyone to take seriously anymore. Zorgratha's laughter began to subside, though it was still tinged with admiration. He looked over at his fleet and saw that, despite their pride and chaos, they too were losing interest in the ongoing madness. "I've had enough," Zorgrath finally admitted, rubbing his temples. "This has gone far enough. I need a drink." For the first time, the Deathworlders' reign of absurdity seemed to be running out of steam. The final paradox. The Galactic Council and the Deathworlders found themselves facing a paradox. They had fought their way through a ridiculous battle of absurdities, and yet neither side could claim a definitive victory. Instead, they had both waged an insane war of attrition, each trying to outweird the other. And in the end, both sides realized the same thing: perhaps it wasn't about winning at all. In a galaxy full of rules, orders, and strategies, the Deathworlders had broken all the rules. And now, the Council had joined them in that chaos. In the quiet aftermath, the two forces agreed to a new kind of peace, not based on order or logic, but on a shared understanding that sometimes the most unpredictable moments could lead to something even stranger: mutual respect. Chapter 5: The Gala of Glorious Absurdities. In the aftermath of the great dance-off that had torn through space and time, the Galactic Council found themselves in uncharted waters. The Deathworlders, it seemed, had forced them into a new reality, a world where warfare was more about performance art than strategy. The Council had been defeated not by weaponry or tactics, but by sheer, incomprehensible silliness. And now, they had no choice but to figure out how to coexist with their chaotic new counterparts. To mark the conclusion of the absurdest battle in galactic history, Zorgrath, ever the entertainer, proposed a new form of diplomacy, a gala of glorious absurdities. It was to be a grand event where representatives from both sides would meet, not to negotiate peace or terms of surrender, but to celebrate the bizarre, unpredictable bond that had formed between them. The invitations arrived via hologram, each one accompanied by an extravagant dance routine and an invitation to join in the celebration of nonsense. The Galactic Council's reaction. The Galactic Council, still reeling from the initial shock, stared at the invitation with a mix of disbelief and resignation. The thought of attending a gala hosted by the Deathworlders, who had just humiliated them in the most absurd way possible, was unthinkable. And yet, there was no escape. The Deathworlders had gained far too much control over the situation. To refuse the gala would be to invite further chaos, or worse, total irrelevance. Chancellor Veridana, now fully aware that the Deathworlders thrived on spectacle, realized that their best chance to salvage anything from this nightmare was to play along. She slammed her hand on the table with sudden determination. "We will attend this gala," she said. "But we will not be humiliated again. We will turn their absurdity into our advantage. If they think we will dance to their tune, they're mistaken. We will lead the dance, as they say." Admiral Tar, still adjusting to the bizarre reality they found themselves in, nodded slowly. "Let's hope we don't get turned into inflatable ducks this time." The gala begins, a world turned upside down. The Gala of Glorious Absurdities took place aboard the Deathworlder flagship, a massive, ever-shifting structure that seemed to exist outside of normal space. Ships of all shapes and sizes arrived, many of them hovering upside down or spinning in circles. Holographic trees grew out of the ceiling, and giant floating teacups drifted lazily through the air, occupied by guests who were more interested in riding them than in engaging in any sort of serious conversation. Zorgrath was waiting in the center of the main hall, surrounded by his crew. His ship had been decked out in ridiculous decorations, balloons shaped like asteroids, a disco ball made of pulsating plasma, and flashing neon signs that read, "Embrace the Madness." The moment the council's representatives entered, they were greeted by a barrage of confetti and a chorus of Deathworlders singing an off-key version of Happy Galactic Day. Veridana and her crew tried to maintain their composure as they entered the main ballroom, but it was difficult. The floor was a checkerboard pattern, but instead of black and white squares, they were filled with ever-changing colors and patterns that seemed to warp as they looked at them. At one point, the floor even began to undulate as though it were a living creature. Zorgrath approached with his usual grin. "Ah, my dear council. I see you've accepted our invitation. Welcome to the first and certainly the most unpredictable gala in the galaxy." The council was forced to smile, though it felt forced, as their eyes darted around at the bizarre sights and sounds. A group of Deathworlders was juggling flaming asteroids while riding unicycles, and another section of the ballroom was filled with inflatable creatures that looked like a cross between an octopus and a giraffe. The ceiling opened to reveal a giant floating squid playing jazz music on a saxophone. Veridana gave a curt nod. "Thank you, Zorgrath. This is certainly one way to negotiate peace." Zorgrath laughed. "Negotiation? Oh, Veridana, this isn't about diplomacy. It's about celebration. After all, why fight when you can party instead?" The absurd debate, who is the true master of chaos? The gala began as expected, utterly unpredictable and nonsensical. But then, a peculiar challenge arose. Zorgrath, feeling particularly cheeky after downing several glasses of something that appeared to be made from liquefied nebula, made a bold proclamation to the assembled guests. "Let it be known," he declared, raising his glass dramatically. "The Galactic Council has surrendered to our superior tactics of chaos. You've all seen it. We are the true masters of disorder, the kings of absurdity. But I have a challenge for you." The room quieted. Even the floating squid paused its jazz solo. Zorgrath pointed directly at Veridana. "I challenge you, Chancellor. You and I one final contest to determine who is the true master of galactic chaos. A test of creativity, of imagination, and of madness. We shall each present our most ridiculous, absurd creation and see who can top the other. Are you up for it?" Veridana's mind raced. She had no choice but to accept. She could not let the Deathworlders claim victory in this strange arena as well. "I accept," she said with steely resolve. "But be warned, Zorgrath. I have been planning something truly chaotic. The Chaos Contest, a battle of imagination." The contest began immediately, and the rules were simple. Each side would create something absurd, using whatever means they could, and the audience, comprised of both Deathworlders and council representatives, would decide whose creation was the most ridiculous. Zorgrath went first. He stepped onto the stage, a theatrical flourish accompanying his every move. With a snap of his fingers, the lights dimmed, and a swirling vortex appeared at the center of the room. Out of it emerged a massive creature, a grotesque, multi-headed beast that seemed to have the body of a jellyfish and the legs of a dancing robot. It twirled and hopped in an erratic rhythm, blaring an incoherent song through loudspeakers that seemed to only play random words like toaster, umbrella, and moonwalk. The crowd burst into laughter, even the council members unable to contain their amusement. Zorgrath grinned as the creature spun, its heads each attempting to engage in a different activity. One was cooking pancakes, another was painting a mural, and the third was practicing ballet. Veridana stepped forward, ready to face the absurdity with her own creation. With a wave of her hand, the floor beneath her began to ripple and bend like water. Suddenly, a gigantic balloon appeared, a balloon shaped like a gigantic elephant-wolf pirate hybrid, with mechanical wings and a circus top hat. But this wasn't just any balloon. As it inflated, it began to levitate and perform acrobatics in midair. It twirled, spun, and even produced a giant pie that it threw at a holographic target. As the balloon landed, it transformed into a giant trampoline, sending several guests into the air, only to have them land on a bed of foam. The crowd roared with laughter, their confusion mixed with delight. Zorgrath stared at the creation. "What is that?" he gasped, his eyes wide with genuine amazement. "It's absurdity," Veridana said with a smirk. "And it's only the beginning." The final verdict, a tie? The contest continued with each side presenting more and more ridiculous creations. There was a flying fish orchestra, a living, singing asteroid, and a holographic tree that produced candy instead of fruit. The audience cheered and laughed as the boundaries of reality seemed to blur even further. In the end, the two sides were left breathless, drenched in foam and confetti, and thoroughly entertained by the strange new competition they had created. The judges, who were themselves caught up in the spectacle, called for a tie. "Both sides have outdone themselves," one of the judges said, grinning from ear to ear. "In the world of absurdity, no one can truly be the victor. Instead, let's call it what it is, a glorious celebration of the unexpected. A new era of chaos." And so, the Galactic Council and the Deathworlders found themselves in an uneasy yet strangely harmonious relationship. Both sides recognized that their true strength lay in embracing the chaos that had once divided them. They would no longer engage in traditional wars, but instead, they would create a galaxy ruled by unpredictable creativity, where the most absurd idea could lead to greatness. As the last of the confetti settled, Veridana shared a quiet moment with Zorgrath. "You know," she said, "I think we may have just changed the future of galactic diplomacy." Zorgrath grinned. "Who says we can't make war fun?" And with that, the Gala of Glorious Absurdities came to an end, not with a formal treaty, but with a shared understanding. In a universe filled with rules, sometimes the greatest victories come from breaking them completely. Chapter 6: The Final Curtain. The universe is unprepared. Months had passed since the Gala of Glorious Absurdities, and the galaxy had not been the same since. The Deathworlders, still at the forefront of unpredictable chaos, and the Galactic Council, now transformed into the Council of Curiously Absurd Diplomacy, had inadvertently altered the course of history. The universe that once thrived on order and predictability was now teetering on the edge of the utterly unmanageable. It wasn't so much that the galaxy had changed. It was that the notion of change itself had been obliterated. Reality had taken a backseat to creativity, and the line between absurdity and innovation had blurred into something truly peculiar. A few moments before the grand finale, Zorgrath was preparing something truly ridiculous and absolutely mind-bending for the galaxy. The universe had become his personal canvas, but he was determined to do one last, unforgettable stroke. The Zorgrath Paradox, a universal switcheroo. Zorgrath, in his infinite wisdom, or perhaps lack of it, decided to play one final joke, one so colossal that it would redefine everything the galaxy thought it knew about space-time, reality, and absurdity. "I think it's time for a little chaos," Zorgrath said to his most trusted crew member, the ever-loyal Glimrak, whose face had become a permanent smile since the victory celebrations. "Let's make the universe swap everything around. I'm talking species, planets, gravity, time itself. I'll call it the Zorgrath Paradox. It's going to be glorious." Glimrak looked nervously at the glowing control panels in front of him. Are you sure about this, boss? I mean, we've literally altered the fabric of space and time with all those dance moves. Now you're gonna flip the entire universe?" Zorgrath gave him a wicked grin. "If we can't top our own absurdity, what's the point of living?" And with that, he flipped a massive, glowing lever, an act that had no logical reason for existing but caused an immeasurable wave of energy to spread across the galaxy. The Great Switcheroo. The universe froze. Then everything went sideways. Time no longer moved in a straight line, it spiraled. Planets switched positions. Gravity began to work on whims. The sun decided it wanted to take a vacation in another galaxy, while an asteroid decided it wanted to be a planet and threw a temper tantrum about it. But the strangest of all? Species were swapped. Entire species were uprooted and plopped onto new worlds with no rhyme or reason. One moment, a highly intelligent race of insect-like beings was sitting in an interstellar council chamber, only to blink and find themselves on a tropical beach in the middle of a sandstorm, wearing swimsuits made of palm leaves. Another moment, sentient blobs of gas found themselves in humanoid bodies, experiencing the joy and horror of opposable thumbs for the first time. The Deathworlder flagship transformed into a giant space-faring amusement park, complete with roller coasters that curved through asteroids, while the Galactic Council's headquarters morphed into a giant labyrinth made of mirrors, where everyone who entered was forced to question their own reflection. The Zorgrath paradox was complete. The universe had become a nonsensical jumble of things that made no sense. Everything was in flux. Everything was absurd. The Council's response, embracing the madness. Chancellor Veridana, now in the form of a flamingo with a monocle, flapped her wings as she soared above the Council's newly formed headquarters, a giant swirling vortex in space that defied all the laws of physics. Her new form was, in a strange way, refreshing. She had long grown tired of the weight of diplomacy, and now, it seemed, she was free to soar in both a literal and metaphorical sense. "I never thought I'd be a flamingo," she muttered, trying to adjust to her new beak. "But maybe this is the future of our galaxy." Her advisors, who were now various animals, creatures, and sentient beings from all corners of the universe, gathered around her. One of them, a former human who had become a sentient, purple blob, floated over. "Chancellor, I think you're onto something. The galaxy has been shaken to its core, yes. But does it feel wrong?" Veridana paused. She thought about the way the universe had been before all of this, the rigid structure, the rules, the constant battles of power. "No, I think it feels right. We've fought for order for so long, and it hasn't gotten us anywhere. Maybe embracing the chaos isn't so bad." The Deathworlders' final message, the victory of absurdity. Back aboard the Deathworlder flagship, Zorgrath watched as the galaxy he had so carefully bent to his whims continued to spiral into delightful chaos. It was a victory beyond anything he could have imagined. The universe was no longer bound by rules, but instead, it was a playground for creation. And then, Zorgrath broadcasted his final message to the galaxy. "My fellow absurdities," he boomed, his voice reverberating across the universe. "I present to you the new reality. The Deathworlders have shown you that order is an illusion, a construct of weak minds. Now, you are free. No longer do you need to be bound by time, space, or logic. Let your imaginations run wild. The galaxy is your playground." He raised a giant glass of glowing liquid, which changed colors every second. "From now on, chaos will reign supreme. Create what you wish. Destroy what you please. Laugh as much as you can, and never stop dancing." The message ended, and Zorgrath leaned back in his chair with a satisfied grin. "Well, Glimrek, I think we've just made history." Glimrek, now wearing an inflatable penguin costume, because why not, gave a thumbs up. "You've done it again, boss. The galaxy is officially unmanageable. The new era, a galaxy of possibilities." As the Deathworlders' influence continued to ripple throughout the galaxy, it became clear that their reign of absurdity had transformed reality itself. New civilizations popped up, each one stranger than the last. New rules were made up on the spot, literally. Worlds where everyone spoke in rhymes, where time moved backward, and where gravity was optional all became part of the new norm. The Galactic Council, now rebranded as the Council of Curiously Absurd Diplomacy, embraced this new era with open arms. They, too, had realized that control was an illusion. The universe was too vast and too unpredictable to rein in. Why fight it when they could join in the fun? Veridana, still a flamingo, stood at the helm of the new council, overlooking the wild new galaxy they had created. "You know," she said to her advisors, "I never would have imagined that we'd end up here. But maybe this is the way it was always meant to be." One of her new advisors, a sentient jellyfish with a top hat, floated by. "It's all part of the plan, Chancellor. The plan of pure, unrestrained, creative chaos." The final laugh. And so, the galaxy entered an age of unfathomable madness, where every moment was a burst of creativity, absurdity, and laughter. There were no more wars, no more treaties, no more structure. Instead, there were endless possibilities, bizarre, beautiful, and ridiculous. In the end, Zorgrath, Veridana, and the rest of the universe's inhabitants found that the greatest victory wasn't in winning at all, it was in creating a reality where the impossible was possible, where absurdity reigned, and where the only rule was that there were no rules. As the final credits of this tale roll, Zorgrath could be heard laughing somewhere in the distance. Who says you can't have fun in the universe? The end? Or just the beginning of more chaos?